right. Thanks everyone for being here. I know it's the end of the day, and I was pretty interested in the other two sessions this hour, so I appreciate you being here, and I will try and live up to that. Um, so how many of you were at the session I did earlier? Okay, a lot of you. So there's going to be some repetition, hopefully not too much. Um, So the presentation I did earlier was kind of high level, like how do we go about teaching technology in a way that is adaptable, is generalizable because it's uncertain, it's unpredictable in the future. So this session is more of a practical application of that. What are some of the more concrete ways that we can implement it, specifically using AI? And so another thing is that I appreciated the discussion in the earlier session, and so I'd love to get into that early on. So if you have comments, questions, suggestions, things that you've tried that have worked or not worked, I think everybody would appreciate. We can learn from each other's experience. I didn't put my introduction slide in this one. So I'm Nick Hafen. I teach about technology at BYU Law School. I've been there for a couple of years, and before that, I practiced at a big law firm and then opened my own law firm, doing solo work. And now I'm also at a smaller law firm. So that's on the side, because everybody needs, more than one full-time job, right? Just had all this free time. Okay. So to start off, I've got a list of some stuff I found on Reddit. How students say they are using generative AI. So there's how students are using it and how they say they're using it, which I would guess the latter category is narrower. I would guess they're using it in ways that they have not disclosed. There were some funny comments, like the post is like, "How are you guys using generative AI?" And a bunch of people said, "Nice try, Dean." Like, not telling you. Here's some legal research related ones, summarizing the main points of articles, using it for legal research at a job, brainstorming, structure and flow. Here's some writing related ones. Some people using it to explain things to them, some people doing more grammar and style, reviews, creating outlines, writing the abstract, or the full thesis, as you see in the first point there. Oh, sorry, that's the subject of AI, not wrote it with AI, I think. Some people used it for class preparation. Again, more explaining concepts. The last one used it to understand the restatement, which they were not a fan of, apparently. Generating summaries. Some studying and exam prep uses. Generating ideas for topics, more explanation, example, creating test questions, using it as a mock grader. I like that they uploaded some sample answers saying this is an A, so that there was actually some grounding for the grading. Probably still a roll of the dice. Here's some other ones: doc review, cover letters. This last one, this person is probably a little bit different than most law students. They built their own. What's the R? Something neural network. It's not recurring. Yeah, anybody remember what the R stands for? Can't remember. I'm not sure. At some time I knew. Okay, so some interesting. They're using it in some interesting ways that they've disclosed. Recurrent. So you may have heard the phrase that people sometimes use, like treat generative AI, or think about it like Iron Man, not Terminator, right? Think about it as a way to enable, to empower. rather than as a threat. This is supposed to be like the Terminators, like the judge, jury, and executioner, but Iron Man's talking. It looks kind of like the lawyer. It's wearing judge's robes. It's, we're getting there. We're getting there. The artists aren't out of work quite yet. No, this is AI generated. Yeah. I don't know. I guess you're saying that I did this instead of getting an artist.
I would hope that a person with the skill to draw that would have a little more sense than to draw.
Yes. Yes. And the wig on the judge just isn't quite, Yeah. It was because I had to like make it in, well, ChatGPT wouldn't create Iron Man and Terminator, understandably. Gemini would. So I put it in Gemini and it created a version, and then I put it in ChatGPT, and it did make some modifications. On occasion, it would still refuse me. But then I had to put it into Firefly to kind of fine tune a little bit. And the wig on the judge is from Firefly, and so the style doesn't really match. That's like a weird fleur-de-lis or some fern. I don't know.
It's like Japanese.
Yeah. Fun stuff. Honestly, my most frequent use of AI is probably making fake Pokemon with my son. He just loves coming up with his own. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is how we use AI to better prepare ourselves for teaching, preparing ourselves in terms of increasing our understanding and mastery of material, preparing lesson plans, that kind of thing, creating exercises, simulations, and then preparing students as well, right? So that they can learn to use AI, they can see how it works, they can be prepared for legal practice, right, substantively, but also for technology that they'll be using in legal practice. Okay, so these are some of the controls that we have, the levers that we have to work with. You'll recognize these if you were in the previous presentation. Deliberate practice is how we develop skills, how we develop expertise. We do things over and over again in different situations, and we get feedback, telling us that was good, that was bad, that was wrong. Desirable difficulty, there's a lot of hard and tedious things in legal work. Some of them are useful, some of them are not. So figuring out which is important. And then having these mindsets, growth, meaning you believe that you can learn new things. Investment, you're willing to put effort in now up front in order to get a payoff later, which is usually how technology works. And then ownership, just taking charge of your own skill development, making sure, if your school or your employer is not training you on generative AI, or they're outsourcing your training to generative AI, that you compensate for their lack of training or whatever it might be, that you make sure you get the training you need, even if someone else is not providing it for you. And agency is just kind of a common theme. Be in charge of, take control of, be intentional about your use of technology. So we're going to talk about some examples of how to apply these things, use technology, use these levers to help people learn, ourselves and students. Okay. Again, if you were in the last session, this is review. Our legal tech initiative is how we deliver most of our technology training at BYU. The three categories are competence. We want all of our students to have the bare minimum competence, that they don't mess up, that they know how to do version control in a DMS if they're going to a law firm that uses a document management system. We don't want them drowning because of the technology, because they will be drowning for other reasons when they get into law practice. Excellence, some students are really interested in this stuff, and we want to enable them to pursue that. And then resilience is just the uncertainty of the future of technology, the future of legal practice. We don't want to train people just to use the tools that are available today. We want them to be flexible and adaptable for the future. Okay, so This is a long list of some of the things we do that I'll go over quickly because I want to get to some more specific examples. We have a tech training series. It's more or less weekly. So we have about 10 each semester. It's lunch and learn, which means that we have pretty good attendance for a non-required event. And these are usually software focused, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, e-discovery, there's a cybersecurity, there's a good variety, but they're very practice focused. And we work on getting the students to actually use the tools that they'll use in practice. We have an AI course that is, it's a regular for credit bearing course that I teach. It's probably the first third is more focused on using AI in legal practice, understanding how it works. And then the rest of it is more law of AI, public policy, things like that. We've worked to incorporate tech training into other courses. I worked with our contracts professor to create some assignments and exercises for his class this year. I've done some training on other technology in different courses, or talked about AI resources, things like that. I should add faculty training on here. We've done faculty training on AI. Locks Design Lab and Incubator, that's less just AI specifically focused, but that's where students, that's kind of like our building lab. Like students are often building technology. It's not always technology, but that's an easy way to describe it. Our Law and Innovation Challenge. So Law X, it's a semester-long course focused on design thinking. The Law and Innovation Challenge is like compressing that into a day. It's like a day-long design sprint where student teams, form and come up with a proposed solution, and they do a presentation on that at the end of the day. And we got to give cash prizes out, which they appreciated. The Future of Law lecture series is just, we bring in outside speakers a couple of times each semester to talk about what's going on in law and how things are changing. I think that contributes to this third point, helping them be generally knowledgeable about trends and technology and how the practice of law is changing. We started an AI sandbox pilot, so it's still very vaguely defined, but we had some students come in and we did some more in-depth training on AI. We had some of our IT students built a RAG bot you could upload or point it at URLs for a knowledge base, and then ask questions about it, and you could select the model and you could compare, responses from different models to the same question. One of the amusing questions, how was it phrased? I can't remember, and it's not going to be funny if I can't remember. The AI Academy, I'll talk about more in depth in a second. The legal research group, that's our faculty that teach legal research in the research and writing first year course. We've been meeting on kind of an ad hoc basis, but maybe every 2 to 4 weeks, just to like spend some time talking about these issues, how to teach them, coming up with questions or exercises or things, and sharing knowledge. We got approved to hire an AI research fellow, which is exciting. And then we have a student group that's focused on law, innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship that hosts some events. So that's like a big list of what we do, but I want to get into the specifics. So we have a program called the 1L Academies. They're these different practice group based week-long, like hands-on experiences for first-year students after exams finish up. They're in different cities, and it's been very effective. They are pretty tired the week after exams, but we try and make it fun, and it's hands-on. It's different than the very theoretical work that they've been doing in their classes, and usually they really appreciate that. But this year I did an AI related one for the first time, listed first there, both because it's the best and because it starts with A. So it was, let's see, it was a Friday, and the next week, Monday through Thursday, we visited some companies, some law firms, talked to, Utah has an Office of AI Policy that was created last year, to study how to regulate AI. Helpfully, it's run by my brother-in-law. So he talked to the students as well. And so this was a really good opportunity for me to practice what I preach and come up with some very hands-on practical exercises. And I'm going to talk about one of those now. So for most of the exercises we did throughout the week, we had a single fact scenario about this company called OTC, stands for Online Therapy Company. You would think with ChatGPT we could come up with a more creative name. So it was a company that's creating a therapy chatbot. Utah passed some specific laws about this last session. Plus, there are all the other laws that are implicated. And so this was the basis for a lot of the exercises they did throughout the week. It culminated in a board presentation, right, to one of the lawyers that we were working with. But it was supposed to be, you're presenting to the board about the legal risks of AI, of how you're using it at the company, of what you're building. So to kill two birds with one stone, I wanted them to practice interacting with a client, getting information from a client. I need to know, is the marketing department using AI to create images? If so, what is their license? Are they making modifications, right? These all have to do with the legal risk for the company. But I also wanted to show them the build a GPT feature in ChatGPT. Who's used that before? A few? Okay. We will look at it right now. So let's see. So if you have a paid version, you can create a GPT. You come in here and conversationally say what you want it to do. And it just is basically like a specialized version of ChatGPT that you can then have conversations with. I'm going to go back here. So we made it together. I made it in front of them. I asked them for feedback. And I think it was based on their feedback, a really useful experience for them. A lot of them were not aware that AI could do this. And so it was helpful to learn that. But it was also, we were also creating this training tool. And so there are 4 different scenarios that we put in. And each one, it will adopt a particular persona from somebody at the company who you are interviewing in order to get information about how they're using or building AI. Let's see. Octi is the name of the therapy bot. So on my end, before I did this with the students, I used ChatGPT to help me get the background information to create this, right? I had about a paragraph description of the fact scenario. And I just went back and forth with ChatGPT to build that out, to come up with these different personas, to come up with the data that we then uploaded as the knowledge base for this GPT. So that saved me a lot of time. Right? One of my most effective uses of AI is creating dummy data. Sometimes, if I'm doing Excel, it doesn't really matter much what the data is. I need a cap table that looks real. And it would not be difficult for me to do, but it would take time, and I'd have to think about it. But you just put it in ChatGPT and you don't have to, right? So I find that it's really useful in this regard. And of course, as always, you have to be in charge, right? You have to confirm the information. You have to direct it the way that you want. When you're creating it in that interface, you can say, well, don't do this, don't do that. I want you to do this instead. When the user asks for this, this is how you respond. Like I put in instructions like, you know, you're an employee at the company that's not used to talking to somebody from legal, so you're a little bit nervous. You don't volunteer a ton of information, and that makes the students have to, you know, work a little harder to elicit the information. But it was really helpful for them to see that, to see how well it worked, how well it didn't work. And so I think overall it was a pretty effective exercise in terms of learning the substance and learning about AI. I think I've been reading more about project-based learning in the context of generative AI. This is an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education, making that case that basically we should give like bigger, more complicated, more creative projects to students and allow them to then, they can use AI, but there's so much here that AI can't do yet, or you know, AI can't run the whole thing on its own. So they have to kind of be the master. I will use it for this purpose in this way. And so I've been thinking more about this as I'm thinking about, because I think it's difficult and maybe fruitless to try and prevent them from using generative AI a lot of the time. And so I try and come up with things that even if they use AI, will still require them to use and develop the skills that I'm trying to target. And that will maintain the like effort and performance to grade. You know, it's not going to mean that people who do a little bit of work get grades that are as good as people who do a lot of work and perform well. During the academy, I used AI for some other exercises. On the first day, I had like a day to teach them as much as I could about the substance, about how AI worked and the law of AI. And so one of the things that we did is I gave them like some one sentence hypotheticals, like an automated self-driving truck company or something like that. And they had about an hour, they worked in pairs, about an hour to come up with a presentation and present to the rest of the group on the legal issues that would arise in that situation at that kind of company. So putting the crunch on in terms of time, but opening it up, like use AI however you want. You're just ultimately responsible for the work product. I think was helpful, right? There were some students, I mean, they chose this academy, they rank them, and all of them had it, you know, first or second or third on their list. But some of them had not used it very much before and were a little bit skeptical of AI. And it was kind of fun to see the eyes open when they saw what it could do. But for that kind of person, this time crunch exercise can be really helpful because they otherwise might say, well, I know he said I can use AI, but I don't quite trust it. And so I'm not going to. You do have to be careful with this kind of thing because you don't want them to learn the wrong things. So if the assignment, you know, if it's something you need them to know well, you have to follow it up with the content that they need to make sure they understand. But it's kind of a good like pre-exercise to get them thinking, to get them using the tools, seeing what they work well for and what they don't. Like I said before, I used it to help me create the background for this simulation exercise. Brainstorming, creating facts, creating materials like documents, agreements and things that are going to be part of the exercise, creating a tool like a customized GPT. Like I said, building it in front of and with them, I think was really helpful, instead of just showing them a polished product. With technology has this like veneer of simplicity and ease and lack of bias. But when you get under the hood and show how things work and talk about what goes in, you discover that there are an awful lot of human decisions that go into the process. And every one of those human decisions is an opportunity for a judgment call, for bias to enter in, right? And that helps them to understand how the tools work. And that's a very generalizable point, right? When they carry that to another area of technology, they know to think about who made the decisions about, how search results are ranked, or, any of these things. They know to look for the human decisions that went into it. Having them create AI tools like the GPT, having them give oral presentations like they did at the end of that week. They can't fake it as much, like they can't be using AI as they're doing the presentation. These can be time intensive, right? If you're teaching a class, you have a limited amount of time. And if anytime you do presentations, it takes up a lot of that time. So you do have to be careful. With a larger class, it might not work well. I had 7 students, so it worked just fine. We split them into 2 groups. But they were welcome to use AI as much as they wanted, however they wanted in creating it. Again, they were just responsible for the ultimate work product. The tech training series that I do, there's a lot of similar things. I mentioned earlier in the previous session that I try and integrate the facts week to week so that we're operating with like the same set of documents, the same set of facts, to bring it all together. And using AI has been helpful in that. Like, these are the things that I need students to take away. This is, I'm thinking maybe I have them make modifications to a contract, and AI can help you kind of build a story, build facts around that flesh it out and make it more realistic, make it stickier, and more effective for the students. Like I said earlier, creating dummy data and preparing the documents and materials, right? You can prepare these personas so that, the week you're doing Microsoft Word, you've developed, the company is hiring this person to be the CTO. We're working with the employment agreement to demonstrate Microsoft Word concepts. Well, the next week, if we're doing Excel, I can use those same personas. I can go to ChatGPT and say, create a cap table for that company using the names of the people that we've been using. And it makes it all tie together nicely. Okay, so some of this is, well, let's pause. Comments, questions at this point? Things that you've done that have worked well or that didn't work well?
Weird question, but if we stopped calling it Gen AI now, it's just everything is AI everywhere.
A lot of people, yes. In my AI class, that's one of the things that we talk about. We look at all those court orders that have come out, and talk about how vaguely worded they are. Like some of them will say, attorneys may not use any AI. Sometimes it says, except for Lexis and Westlaw, which there are plenty of non-AI issues with that. But that, spell check, like Google, I used Google. Like, do I have to now attest that I used AI? I wish somebody would, be a little snarky that way to prove a point, but you don't want to tick off the judge. But yeah, a lot of people just use AI, and I use it often for shorthand if it's established that we're talking about generative AI. But yeah, if you don't specify, in some situations, it can be meaningful.
Just to follow up on that. So do you focus primarily when you're teaching students on generative AI, or there are other types that you?
Yeah, in the class, it's broader. It's a lot of generative AI, but we do talk about, the machine learning and natural language processing and classical AI, all that predated, because a lot of the issues are the same. We still had issues with bias in those models, and they're still being used. So there are plenty of AI related legal issues that crop up. Generative AI is just such a great source of those and it's new. We talk about it a lot. With like the 1 hour, that's when I have a semester in like a 1 hour training. I usually focus on generative AI, but I try and use generalizable concepts when I can. Like you can talk about data. Data is always biased in some way. It's imperfect, right? And so you can talk about issues like that. Or like I said earlier, some of the human decisions, you point out that human decisions go into this. And you know, I hope that they remember that when they are thinking about other technology too. Yeah.
Corey, to add what you're saying, I teach first year legal writing and also an AI class, and I've started using multiple generative AI tools to help me write and so I'll like write it with Claude and then at GPT and say plausibility, verisimilitude. I find that I end up with a much higher quality record.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a common theme for me that when people think that they can go from like a low effort input to a high quality output, like I can put in a sentence prompt and get a high quality document, it doesn't work well, right? It works pretty well the other way. You put in a ton of stuff and ask for a little bit. But the more you use it, the more you start to do that. You say, well, I like this one more for that, and then I want to check it over here, like I was saying with the images. Yeah, and I think that's important for students to understand. This isn't magic. People have made decisions about how these work, and that means they're better or worse at some things than others. Plus, it's useful for them to use different ones for you to be using them. Yeah.
So, this is an anecdote, and then I've got a question about whether it can be generalized to something useful. So as a test for myself, I had a real world legal problem, a consulting problem. When I got the problem, I wrote a prompt for ChatGPT and I ran it. I didn't read the results. And then I did the research and I wrote my own answer. And then I wrote a prompt. Now, this is an engineered prompt, right? Because I knew the terminology, I knew the circumstances I was dealing with. I wrote that, I submitted it to ChatGPT, took that answer was brilliant. I mean, it was just short of being as good as mine. And actually pointed out one thing that I haven't mentioned in mine, and also put a table for me that explains something much easier for my client than I could have done myself. The answer from the first effort was gibberish, and I'm the same practitioner. It was basically an hour of time difference from me working on the problem.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to think. So I'm teaching first year research and writing next year, and I'm trying to think, how can I work this for my students? Because I can't count on every problem being like that. Right, I could have them do exactly the same problem because I can generalize information away from it so that the client's not apparent to the students. Is that something that you've tried to do, or is that something that others have tried to do? It seems to me to be one of the most valuable ways to show them what the possibilities are and what the weaknesses are of these tools.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think low effort inputs get low effort outputs. And I'm trying to think of how one of the assignments that I had them do in the AI class was, it was basically like, assume a partner has come to you and said, we're researching these legal AI platforms for the firm. Will you please like research this and, make a recommendation on which one is best? And I said, ignore price. It was just focus on the substantive stuff. So they had to choose, it was 4 or 5 different legal tasks, and then they had to pick 2 of the legal AI platforms plus a general one like ChatGPT and compare them and see which was better for what. And I think maybe one way to improve that assignment is to give them a little more direction like that, like to have them do something that's not just one prompt, one response. Do something that requires iteration or a more complex prompt. I think that could be a good learning experience for them. Has anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Exercise in my advanced legal research. Not really a complicated question, but it was something that involved looking at ordinances and state regulations, and federal regulations, and all these things together that aren't typically found in, they're not covered by all the stuff in Protege, they're not covered by all the different systems. did that for homework, just class, we split them in groups and we kind of looked at the outputs, and at that point, they had enough knowledge to know what was a good answer and what wasn't. They were able to say, hey, it missed these ordinances, and I said, well, look at it. Was that covered in the sources that they're pulling from? You know, probably not, or we know now that it's pulling in the wrong county, it couldn't figure out what county we were doing. They had enough basis to be able to critique. They were also able to say, hey, this gave me a good list of starting points, like I didn't think to look at the public. I found useful, and they also could see others, and I still have to.
Do you think that as a permanent problem or a temporary problem, and that they should bother to learn anything?
That's a good question.
If it's a permanent problem, then they have a job. And if it's a temporary problem, then a year from now, better at it, and 2 years from now, it's 98% better at it. But what's the prognosis?
Well, I think some of it too is dealing with what's available to those systems. So there were secondary sources that did a much better job and much faster. That was not included in either. So I think there's always going to be some of that. And also, I think there's always going to be areas of law that you don't know enough about. And if you're throwing it into these systems and just assuming that what they're giving, that's a problem too. So knowing when to use it, and judiciously, like when you have, or to know to go to a secondary source and that. And they are using the right terminology. Resource or
I think that's a tough question, right? We don't know where things are going to go. We don't know how good it's going to get. But you know, I figure they'll be better positioned if they understand now how well it works, what it works well for and what it doesn't, what it misses. Yeah.
What answer to that question is that somebody is going to have to decide when the circumstances that you describe as a possibility come to pass or they don't. Some human is probably going to have to decide that, assuming Skynet hasn't taken over everything, right? And I think if we could talk to students about, do you want to be the person who's capable of doing that, or do you want it not to be? And then learning how to evaluate the outputs of these things is really just like learning the writing of a junior, learning how to evaluate the output of a junior associate, right? So if you're going to be a senior partner, you need to know how to do that. And if you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to need to know how to evaluate the AI outputs. And I think that's a moderately persuasive argument. I don't know that it's right, because it could be next year. You're happening in 6 months for all I know.
Well, it's persuasive, but it's still a question of, well, how many people are required to accomplish that. So I remember from this conference last year, one of the things that stuck in my head was a comment somebody made about, you know, associates for your firm, but now you could get two great AI people instead, and they're good at what they do, and they do that. What makes a great AI person in the context of last year's conference? But you would assume both a facility with enough knowledge to get a good out, but you'll have to know what you're asking and then you're saying, I don't know what you ended up with. So should do law schools reduce them? And then like once what are I don't know, I don't want to make everybody paranoid. Already are.
And that too. I think it comes, so for me, and my background is as a humanist, a follower of rhetoric. So my approach to it is to say, well, the AI ChatGPT doesn't know anything that's happened since it was last trained, right? Unless I've fed it in there, because the model's not updated every day in the same way that our brains are updated. And it never knows the circumstances that you're experiencing in the case on the ground. So it's not sensitive to the body language of people that you're interacting with in court or across the table from you in the office. And for you to understand that body language, you have to have the kind of imagination that you cultivate only by being connected with other humans. That's what the humanities is about. And then being able to target your response to that situation, that's what we've been studying as rhetoric for the last 2,500 years. And it's about being sensitive to what you're experiencing and then tailoring your approach to it. Now, ChatGPT is going to get a long way to start being able to do that in certain kinds of environments. I just doubt that it's going to be able to get that far that fast until they can experience, until this thing can experience what it's like to be a human. It's not going to understand what it's like.
So the question then, this practical question comes, and I think this does go back to, really to this talking about, is, at what point is it's on this kind of a curve, and I guess eventually becomes this kind of a curve, right? At what point is, it not good enough for a scholar of rhetoric, but good enough for a person who, would like to get their driver's license back, right? And it's probably at some point, probably now, pretty well past basic stuff, and lawyers don't have to. I make art on law school once in a while, but not that much because I am a fan, right? I mean, I went to law school myself. Law schools are my customers. I'm all in on law schools. And I not to be bashes. And I worry because I've done some contract drafting and used ChatGPT for that. And I try to come at it from 15 different angles and stuff. And the output's not bad. And I asked you at one point, why did this come out? Right? That's not a question I don't think people would normally ask an AI, but I didn't understand why this seems so good. And it gave me a pretty good answer. It says it can identify when people are putting the amount of effort and thought and care into getting a good response out of it. People are doing that, and it's weighting those higher, and it's accumulating that because it's a big world out there, and a lot of people with training are using it, and a lot of people with no clue, more people with no clue are using it, but a few people, which turns out to be a lot, who do have a clue, are also using it, and it's latching on those, and that's accelerating.
I would two sort of thoughts, right? One, if worried about lawyers as the legal market, right, and what's out there, is that I don't know the exact statistics, but they've done a lot of studies on how many people who have legal needs actually get assistance from a lawyer, and it's something like 10%. Right? In other words, most legal needs, most needs for a lawyer go completely unmet.
That was the keynote.
Yeah.
This was too.
Oh, I wasn't here for the keynote.
We covered it, so you're
Yeah, right.
perfectly.
Yeah. Whoever gave the keynote is brilliant. Yeah, but I mean, so that's one, is that there's a space for potentially additional people that we previously couldn't support just because of the economic model that may now. The other is me as curmudgeon, and that's, I think, more and more as it becomes grayer and grayer, right? Is that I think all the signs right now are that ChatGPT and generative AI is flattening out in terms of performance. We've gotten five. We've gotten five. In other words, and I think all of the push hype right now is all signs that they got to get it now because it's not getting better. I mean, that's just my impression as a curmudgeon. So in other words, I personally am not necessarily as worried about it getting better and therefore eliminating a lot more jobs than it would now, because I actually don't think it's.
Also, but remember, sorry, take over.
No, I don't think. I'm going to derail, and I apologize.
But it's still, but then again, we have, we do have things so over here because we're in this field, so we do those things. So, for example, I have friends who have an AI company, and they are not, writing LLMs or any of that. They are taking those and making tools, to strap onto those.
Oh yeah, specialized stuff.
And that stuff is advancing incredibly rapidly, and as people figure out what can turbocharge this thing they already do. And so like my friends are doing the thing where they're checking citations for scientific academic articles, and all of a sudden they're in Nature, right? I mean, and they've got they just went, and so there can be this sort of second order effect of using something that's pretty good and then figuring out how to get the best out of it and turning it into something else. And so yeah, maybe the LLMs have kind of started to plateau a little bit. But the things that people are now realizing they can do with something that's at this level of capability are creating a sort of echo of that, curve and boosting it again. It's all times.
Yeah, especially if we get a specialized level where they're coming down to your ordinances, right? And there's a specific one just built off of like, the city's ordinances, right? I can certainly see improvement.
Absolutely, yeah. As costs come down too, it makes more things profitable to do.
Imagine, sorry.
No worries, no worries. Thank you for the comments. So I've got a few examples here. A lot of them are the same as in the earlier session. I think it's helpful to show students where AI fails. You know, it gave this lawyer fake cases. This is actually, I like to show students, the lawyer had to file like his transcripts, his conversations with ChatGPT. And so you can kind of see how he got there. At first, he was getting all real cases. Then he asked for more and more specific things and ended up with these are just the first 8 that were in the motion or the brief. So I think it's helpful to look at how we got there. This is another example of a hallucinated case from ChatGPT. So it's helpful to show students those examples. This is Lexis giving a couple hallucinated cases highlighted there. Tools that are returning real sources can still give you hallucinations or errors, however you want to describe them. Examples where AI almost works. This is the bankruptcy example that I've brought up in a couple sessions today. Vincent from VLEX is where the screenshot is from. It picked up on a nuance that none of the other platforms did. And that's helpful for showing students, you know, like it didn't, you know, it didn't look at the, the fact that this platform caught it and the others didn't helps demonstrate where some of the oversights can be, and demonstrates the need, in some way demonstrates the need for a human, but also one of the AIs caught this. And so, yeah.
Why did you catch it? Did it have a trained on visual materials?
Trying to think. So the primary law is probably the same. I mean, they wouldn't have like the head notes and key numbers. But I think VLEX has their own, they have their own citator. So I would guess that the training material, there's significant overlap, but this goes back to understanding what's under the hood. There's all sorts of systems and decisions layered on top of that. There's one system that chunks the source documents for the purposes of retrieval augmented generation. There's decisions about how you chunk the case. Some of those chunks of a case are more important than others. How you classify them. Do you have a citator signal for each one? You have another system that does ranking once the results are retrieved. You have a system that does summarization. Often they're different models because they're good at different things. So, you know, understanding all that human judgment, I think is helpful. But yeah, you know, we're just coming back to your, like, we don't know how better it's going to get and how soon. So, you know, we just do our best for now. And, you know, tell people not to go to law school. I'm kidding. I like law school. Yeah.
How long before ChatGPT can replace us as training lawyers? I mean, that to me seems like a bigger risk in a way, because stuff that we do has to be generalized. We use made up problems, so we might be very creative about them, but they're not the real world. And if you know, ChatGPT can do all that, maybe we're not necessary anymore.
Yeah, I think we can replace a lot of what we do, right? This, you know, just like on-demand learning replaced a lot of what we do, videos. You know, it's just creeping up in terms of what it can do. It can do more. Like the example of building a GPT, right? I would have had to role play the client, you know, in order to do that effectively before generative AI. The reason it works well is because it can fill in information that I don't give it. It just extrapolates, and so I don't have to know everything beforehand. Now that means it could, you know, go in a different direction, and it could give different information to different students, and I would have to account for that in analyzing, assessing if it's being graded, right? I'd have to have them, you know, make sure they give me the conversation or something so that I can, you know, maybe they accounted for what it said. That was just different from the other students. But yeah, that's something I couldn't do without technology. nearly as quickly or effectively. I like to think there's still room for us, for somebody to design it, for somebody to decide what students should learn, how they should learn it. And, I think there's always, maybe not always, going to be room for the human stamp of approval. I think with a lot of clients that I have, a lot of the time it's peace of mind that they're looking for. I looked at this contract, it seems okay. What do you think? And with education, students want humans to be making the decisions about what they learn. Even if it's generative AI that does a lot of work, they want to know that a human said, yeah, that's right, or that's okay.
Devil's advocate on that.
Please do.
I got gray hair, right? I want to have a human. I have a 17-year-old son. Is he gonna want to have a human involved by that? That is say, I didn't grow up with AI. He is growing up with AI. I can't imagine that they're not going to look at it different than I'm going to look at it.
I think that's true. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's really important to cover a lot of this, to show the shortcomings, to show that they're outsourcing this decision to somebody. It might be somebody who made an AI tool that they used. But when you use technology, when you automate something, you're letting something else make the decision. And sometimes that's fine. And sometimes you don't want to do that. And so I think, it's like helping, high school students understand why they can't rely on Wikipedia. It's usually right. It's really good for general information, but you show them instances where it's wrong, or where it changed, 10 times that day because it's a politically salient issue and people are fighting.
But Wikipedia, you say don't use Wikipedia. I use Wikipedia when I've written articles. I've gone back to the source and
Exactly.
Wikipedia article sites. And my son came to me the other day and said, Dad, I want to apply for a job. What do you think to me about using ChatGPT to write my resume? I said, absolutely use ChatGPT. Don't end with ChatGPT.
Yes.
Let's go back and look at what the result is, and let's massage it a little bit. So I do agree with that. There's always going to be some human involvement in making final judgments about it. But to Greg's point, does that employ as many people as we have graduating from law schools today? I have real concerns about that.
I think e-discovery, it seems like e-discovery is often a couple of years ahead technologically than the rest of the legal industry. They've already got scenarios where the AI does better measurably than humans. And so I find it interesting to look. I don't have much practical experience, practice experience with e-discovery, but I try to follow what's going on there because, when you can prove mathematically, higher accuracy from the machine, how does the law handle that? What is the burden or the standard that we hold attorneys to? Do we require them to use certain tools, or do we just permit it or encourage, how do we talk about a lawyer's duty in those situations? So I've got a few more examples of integrating AI into assignments, having them compare it to something that they are already familiar with, having them compare it to practical law here, a human authored source, comparing the AI tools to each other, trying different tasks like drafting and research. One of the things that I have heard others do, one of our writing professors, is she said you can use AI to review your paper, like to do proofreading, but any change that you adopt, you have to explain why. And I thought that was in some cases that might be a really good balance between you can use it, but you still have to prove that you understand it. It's like a blue booking assignments. Often you have to cite the rule for the change, for whatever the reason for the change that you made. And that forces people to, it at least makes it harder to BS it. Yeah.
Have students use ChatGPT to write like a short memo or something, and then Simon exactly can check every proposition and what they're doing to check it. Like, starting with what ChatGPT created, and then the task is how do you verify everything that it's.
That's a great exercise.
That's kind of the opposite. I also teach legal research and writing. I have the opposite, similar to. Where students have already written a draft of an assignment, and so then we change.
Mhm. Yeah, we've also done exercises where, you know, they have to go find the key number in Westlaw and like which cases does it refer you to, or some secondary source. What cases does it refer you to? Now do it in ChatGPT or not in Lexis or Westlaw. Which cases does it point you to? Are they meaningfully different in meaningful, important ways? For the research question. Right. Another thing you can do is require transparency. You can use AI, but you have to disclose how you used it. You can require them to like turn in the transcript or something if you want to. You can also make everything harder. We've talked a little bit about this. But we had a training on grading where several faculty members, they're just grading hard. Like you don't get any points for stating a rule. You only get points for applying it. Things like that. The bar is just higher, right? Because you can get more done with technology. I'm going to breeze through this. When you're setting your AI policy, one of the frameworks that I like is the stoplight framework. You should have a default policy for the class, but then on assignments, you can have a different policy for different assignments. I think it's really important to be clear with students about what the policy is, so that they can, follow it. So for red, if it's not permitted, you could also have them certify. I did not use AI on this assignment. It's just another like a little bit of friction. If they're going to cheat, they have to lie a little bit more about it. Maybe it's not effective. Maybe it is. I don't know. You can put different kinds of restrictions on. You can require different disclosure. For a lot of my assignments, it's for just my interest a lot of the time. I just have them say, I did not use AI, or I used AI too, and they just, write a sentence or a paragraph telling me what they used it for. You can require different kinds of attribution or citing. It seems like there's still an open debate on whether and how to cite stuff that you get from AI. I tend to think like if it's any good, you should be changing it and checking it, and it transforms it enough that it becomes yours. But that might change. It gets better and better. And then you can have it open, use it however you want. You can still require them to disclose that they used it or how they used it, or again, citation or attribution. Chicago has a default rule for the law school that I like. It's kind of strict. Number 2 there, even if you cite it's treated as plagiarism, basically. Even if they've got like comments to it that explain this. Even if you give attribution to the AI tool, it's treated as plagiarism if it's treated as not citing a human author. So you can take that or you can leave it, but they do give instructors the flexibility to set their own policy. So that's what I've got on AI policies. I will stick around for any questions or discussion, but thank you all for coming.